we want to specifically look at some of the guidelines on how to be able to develop a good literature review in your dissertations or your thesis. Our content outline, we shall be looking at the overview of the outline, the session objectives, introduction, and then we shall bring forth some of the fundamental aspects that are involved when you are writing what you call your literature review. And more so, we shall develop around 5 steps that you need to follow so that you can develop a good literature review. And then finally, we shall talk about the format of writing literature review, but this is subject to change based on the university guidelines, because remember, as research differ based on the guidelines of the department and also based on the university. But then these are general format that I shall just be providing as a guidelines for you, at least now, to look at and perhaps compare with the guidelines in your university. Now, straightforward, I may go back to our objectives, that we have 2 objectives in this session. One is to be able to conceptualize what is required for you to come up with good literature review of your study topic. And then also to know how to get the right sources that you can use to rely on in developing your literature review. These are some of our important objectives of this session. So now, introduction. Literature review is one of the most important process. It's an account of what is already known on the topic. It is already known and what has already been published on the topic. So what are some of the guidelines which determines how literature review is supposed to be written? Now, there are several discussions that has been made already by several researchers on how a literature review has to be written, but I will give you some of the underlying concepts that cut across most of what you call the argument. Now, we are looking at it that when we want to develop a literature review, we have our topic of the discussion, and perhaps we have already come up with what you call our conceptual framework, identifying what you call the fundamental key indicators in every variable of our study. Okay? The literature review on itself provides a critical recap on what is already been written about the topic by the researchers. Okay? And then it provides identification of relevant theoretical or conceptual framework for research problem. It also gives the identification or development of new or refined clinical intervention to test through empirical research. The literature review provides description of the strength, weaknesses of design, method of inquiry, instruments used in the early previous research that has already been done. And more so, literature review provides the basis for hypothesis to test our hypothesis, especially when we are doing quantitative studies. It also provides a basis on, if at all we have to change the research methodology, what perhaps will the change of research methodology bring what you call changes in the findings, especially with the previous research. So we shall be more interested in a particular author, the methodology used, and the findings. The particular author, the methodology used, what we call the research design, and the findings. And then a person who's reading your work is so much interested in comparing, if at all change of research methodology perhaps brought a change in the findings, or the findings remained the same. So that regardless of the kind of methodology we shall adopt, we are definitely sure that we are able to accept our research hypothesis. Okay, guideline principle during literature review. What should guide you when you want to develop your literature review? Number 1, background more to do with your research topic than your research questions. Now, we are saying that do more background check on your research topic as opposed to your research questions. And then number 2 is look at distantly related work to your work. what is distantly related to your work, but you feel has some relevance. They may have some bit of connection, especially with regard to the variable in your study. So it must be, the literature review must be closer to what you are doing, but may not necessarily means they must have a perfect match with what you are doing, but it must be closer to what you are doing. And next is that when developing your literature review, the approach is funnel approach. In approaching what you call the funnel approach, we begin with what you call the general overview of that particular area as we come down and narrow down into smaller idea that you want to pass across. So the general overview is what is supposed to be provided. Sometimes that general overview, some other universities say that you bring up what you call the so-called world view. Then you come down to regional viewpoint, perspective, and then finally you narrow down to a specific country, issues in your country that is now supposed to. So it's supposed to be like a funnel. If you know the way a funnel looks like, it has a very big, broader base, and it comes down into some narrow perspective. The funnel that we are using, at least for those who are selling paraffin, they know it better. So it has a very big base for collecting that, even the paraffin that you're putting in. But then as you go down, you realize that it narrows. So that's the perspective of writing what you call the literature review. That is, start with a broader base. Then it comes down to narrow into smaller perspective. So that is the general approach. And that standard has not changed. It will apply to every university you go, that we begin from what you call the broader outlook, and then we narrow down to the specific concept that we are discussing. So that's an idea that you cannot forget. Then research, which is closely pertinent to your work, may also be included in the literature review. And more so, emphasis is placed on narrow down categories you may want to deal with in a more specific concept. So that is what we are advocating for when we are writing literature review. Okay, so now we want to move at understanding the concept of the funnel approach. Look at the broad context first, narrow down to specific issues in that particular topic. So we bring in, and in that, when incorporating what you call the funnel approach, you are expected to bring in how those authors have arrived at the consensus, the perspective, consensus perspective need to be included. You talk about Tom, specific year. You talk about Ken, specific year. What did they find out, which we can compare as the general consensus among the researchers with regard to that particular topic? It must come out when we are conducting what we call our literature review. Then also highlight any issue which perhaps is pending, not yet resolved. So that is a very important area. The issues that perhaps were not tackled, especially with those researchers, or were left pending, were not discovered well, were not comprehensively covered, you need to be highlighting those areas. And then finally, we need also to highlight the gaps in the literature, which perhaps our study is interested in filling. So it must be come out very well when you are following up over this funnel approach. So your literature review must be guided by what you call standard specific way of doing it. It's not supposed to be done haphazardly. And remember, as much as possible, that we are also training our students to ensure that in the process of adopting this method, you remain plagiarism. You are not supposed to plagiarize those points from other authors. And therefore, the concept of writing a flawless paper without plagiarism is very key. And in order for you to avoid plagiarism, one of the things that I mostly emphasize to my students is the concept that you have to paraphrase your work and ensure that you cannot pick 3 sentences consecutively from another person without at least paraphrasing that content of what the author is referring to. If you follow that, you will not even require Turnitin to prove that you are within what you call the university requirement of plagiarism. you will definitely fall within 1% or 3% plagiarism, which is acceptable, because most of the other universities accept from 5%, others is 10%, others based on what you call the university requirement or what you call plagiarism. And this is one of the areas where majority of the students end up plagiarizing the literature review, because they don't know how to paraphrase those sentences. Also, they don't know the rules guiding in order to avoid plagiarism. And the rule is, thou shalt not take more than 3 sentences consecutively without doing what you call paraphrasing. Once you obey that rule, you will realize that you don't have any plagiarism in your work, which is very, very important. So now, after learning that, I want to take you to basic steps that we follow when we want to develop a literature review. Step number 1, search relevant literature about the topic on the right scholarly database. Mostly, we expect our students to use what we call referenced journals as part of the important database, which we refer to when developing what we call literature review. And use the right keywords to select the right sources, search engines. You are supposed to use what we call journals, and example of this database can be Google Scholar. Google Scholar has been used often by students when they are building up what we call a literature review. And this is one of the sites that you can't avoid, especially when you are in social sciences. We also have what you call PubMed, which mostly used by the guys in the medicine or in what you call the health sciences. And then we have Science Direct. We can also use this, what you call these sites to be able to develop our literature review. So our step 1 is to identify the right search engine that we'll use to get the right words, which we shall depend on when developing our literature review. So more so, we have talked about Google Scholar is very important for all the team in social sciences, and they depend on it so much, as well as the 3 of them. So number 2, evaluate and select sources. You will go to Google Scholar. You will find several other articles that have been written by different authors. So next step is to evaluate those content and pick now the right content that you want to use for your literature review. Scan through abstracts of those content of the journals. So we depend mostly on what you call the abstract, because you may not read all of them. So scan through what you call the abstract for the books and the journals to see if that topic is relevant with regard to what you are writing. Then go to the reference of that article, the same article, especially if it's a journal, and to identify some other sources that are relevant within your specific topic. So in that case, once you have already identified those topics, you will write those sources and go and search for those same materials so that you can also scan through their abstract. So I'm saying that we depend so much on abstract to develop what you call our literature review, because abstract, we are going to get some of the theories that were used to develop what we call that study. To find out what we call the research design, we are going to find out the findings or what we call the result, and then we are going to find the conclusions and recommendation, which simply means when considering the abstract is enough for me to be developing what you call my literature review, because I want research methodology, the findings of the study. I want recommendations and conclusions, so that I use the same to build, to indicate what the study found out in that particular area. Look at the year of publication. When you are doing what is scanning the literature, ensure they are current, at least 10 to 5 years, based on what you call your university requirement. Some universities require you, it must be 10 years. Some universities require it must be 5 years, except with what you call the theories. Theories does not obey this rule or standard. But we want you to talk about very current literature as much as possible, so that we can say that that is exactly what is currently happening in Japan. That is exactly what is currently happening in Taiwan. That is currently what is in USA. So it simply means I'm doing my study here, and I'm so much focusing on the recent studies that have been done in the same topic in other countries, so that I bring forth the key points that the researchers found out. And I will be so much interested in doing it in my country and trying to establish whether the findings of other researchers can be replicated in my country, or there is what you call differences as a result of geographical differences. The findings in my country may also differ, and I may go out to do what you call my hypothesis testing. So the most important area that needs to be written very well is the literature review, because it talks more. It tells us about what the other researchers have found out. It tells us it gives me what you call the basis of even doing my statistical analysis. Once I've written my literature review so well, you will realize that I already can have what you call project perhaps how my findings may look for and more so when I'm discussing my results, I will say that this is what I found out, but others also found it this way, okay? And then I bring justification perhaps why I feel the difference in my finding based on what majority of the authors also found out. So it's like now I'm bringing a case, just like lawyers, when they build what you call a case in court, you realize that they quote several judgments that have been made in different countries. Now, in that order, he will be convincing the judge that even you now sitting in this bench today, your judgment may not differ far away from what other judges across the world have already set what you call the precedent of what you call the argument. And that is how what you call scholarly work must be done. Because even if what you call judgments that are done in court, is the approach is what you call a scholarly work. Because you will find that we have research assistants that have done a lot of research in that particular case and brought the judge the judgments that were done across the globe, such that now the basis of argument is the judge may not make a judgment which is completely odd from what has already been established as the basis of making the judgment. That is the standard approach by which a scholar work must approach. Now, step 3 is also a very important step. Now, this step is the point where when we are doing what you call the scanning of our literature, we are so much interested in identifying the key themes. The key themes are based on what you call my conceptual framework, the key themes of argument in every journal that I'm reading, the gaps perhaps and the main debate in that source must come out to be the point of my discussion. As you read, pay particular attention to the connection between different sources. Is there some relationship between those sources? Is there points where they come up with what you call points of convergence, consensus, and points of differences? Very, very important that your argument must bring in points of convergence with the researchers and points of divergence, okay? So that we can be able to ascertain that you have done a thorough literature review. It will assist you organize your ideas in a very logical sequence and have detailed analysis about each and every variable you are trying to investigate. That's why conducting proper literature review is very vital, is very important, since it provides what you call a basis of having logical sequence of your ideas. And already you are already thinking about how your study themes is related because of the kind of literature that you have already developed. So we can continue, and we are looking at to look at when you are scanning through details analysis of point of convergence, point of divergence, and the gaps in what you call the literature that others have already done. We need to check at the trends and the pattern. Is the issue having a similar trend? Is it having some common pattern? What is the theme? The theme, especially when I'm doing qualitative study, what are those themes? Can I be able to check whether the themes have some consistency in terms of the findings with regard to that theme with other authors? The main debates and contradictions with regard to scholars, where do they differ? Where do they come to the point of convergence? Then other influential studies are also component of how the general idea on the concept of literature review needs to be developed. This is step 3, and this is the point where we are almost done with what you call synthesizing the journal that a person has written, synthesizing the book that a person has written, synthesizing those scholarly work that others have already published. Okay. Step 4 is outline your literature review structure. Which structure are you going to adopt? These are approaches on how you can structure your literature review. The structuring of the literature review may take the following format: chronological from recent to older publications, or it can be from older publications to the new publication. But remember, our interest is there is a guideline for every university with regard to this chronological format. This they are saying is that we bring in the concept like what we are talking about, the panel approach, the broader perspective of the idea. So this broader perspective of the idea, we are looking at it with regard to they are a little bit older publication, which is a lifespan of 10 years, and we bring to the most immediate publication, which is in the year 2020. Now, thematic organized around several key points, key themes, and then methodologically compare different research methods that have been employed in the previous study and bring up the findings, so that the author reading can be able to start trying to note where the methodological change brings different results. Then theoretical use is to discuss opposing theories, models in what you call study. You are making what you call analytic argument on the theory. And therefore, we want to say what were the gaps in the theory, what did the author, the founder of the theory neglected, and perhaps what are the major issues in this particular area of this topic, which I need now to factor in my study. Very, very important, because remember, the study is very current, and the study is meant to bring in something new, which perhaps other studies that were done previously were omitted or not, so that you contribute to the knowledge, because that is the only way we are going to ensure that our study contributes to the knowledge. Okay, so now that is very, very, very important. So now we want to move to what we call the structure of how to write literature review. So now this structure is actually based on every university will have their own structure. I'm just giving you a format of my university. Now, literature review, mostly we call it chapter 2. Okay, so it begins with what we call introduction. We want to introduce the content of what is inside. When introducing, you are just supposed to highlight the key themes that are going to be covered in that your study up to the time that you talk about summary and the gaps. So like in this case, and remember, when you are writing your introduction, every part in your study, from chapter 1 to up to the entire of your document, even when you are describing the introduction, ensure it is a paragraph. And remember, most students do not know what a paragraph is. A paragraph must have more than 3 sentences. It means you cannot bring a description only with 1 sentence and then you are satisfied that you have written the introduction, because that is just introduction. Remember, it must be a paragraph. Ensure that even the introduction is a paragraph on its own. And in order for it to qualify for a paragraph, ensure that introduction is broken down into 3 sentences. 3 sentences, continuous sentences, for it to qualify to be a paragraph. Then we move to 2.21, perhaps theoretical framework. Now, this is where we bring in the theories that are going to back your study. Where do you get this theory? Now, this theory often are supposed to be connected with the theories that have already been established. Ensure that your theories have connection between the dependent and independent variable. Because remember, in our conceptual framework, we want to make argument on our key variables. We have already identified even the indicators of each and every variable in our study. But we are trying to make that my independent variable has a theory connecting with the dependent variable. So it is me now to set hypothesis and go and either reject what you call the null hypothesis, or I say that, okay, my alternative hypothesis is the right one. Because remember, when we are making what you call a research, we are setting what you call hypothesis, and our null hypothesis simply says that the connection between independent and dependent, there is no relationship between my independent variable and the dependent variable. But remember now, the researcher is stating that now there is a connection between the two, and therefore it will require me to collect data and be able to investigate so that I see whether I'm rejecting the null hypothesis or not. Okay, that's good. So now it can be theories, various theories. Sometimes at the universities require every variable must have a theory. Some, you may have one common theory that connects the entire of your variable. There's nothing wrong with that. But then we must make an argument during the theoretical framework argument, connecting each, how those variables are interrelated with one another. Okay, so if at all you have five variables in your study, you may end up with perhaps even 5 theories of argument. But if you have one common one which is connecting all those you are studying and you can be able to describe them, the better it is. You will only have 1 or 2. But we must see the theory connecting with the dependent variable, because my basis of argument is based on the theory of what others have already developed in over the past. Then in this case, we have what we call the review of the past studies. Now, this review of the past studies simply tells me the various studies that have already been done with regard to this topic by different authors from different countries. Now, this is where mostly you will find your approach is supposed to take the form of a global perspective, the studies that have been done within what you call the global sphere. Then I bring in the studies that have been done within the regional sphere. And then finally, I bring in the studies that have already been done in my country, and then as the basis of my argument. Then I also have what you call the dependent variable, which I may discuss at length. Now, this my dependent variable, remember, this is the subject of my study, and my analysis, I emphasize for you that analysis often depend on the research design and the dependent variable, how the dependent variable has been collected. And remember, the dependent variable can either take the metric form or the categorical form. When the dependent variable has taken the metric form, then I have specific test statistics that will support me. And often I will use, that is the case where I'm allowed to use often what you call the hypothesis testing. Okay, the hypothesis testing. So I can be allowed to run things like multilinear regression models. I can run t-tests, and all are based on the population upon which I picked my sample have a normal distribution. So I've already emphasized the concept of normality, especially for what you call parametric statistics. Very, very important for you, those things to be running in your blood as you continue with building what you call your research knowledge. Okay, then I come to where I talk about the objective one with regard to the dependent variable. I see about the connection between the objective one. I need to bring those discussions, objective 2, objective 3, objective 4 with the dependent variable. Then finally, I provide a summary of my literature review and the gaps in that the literature has not highlighted. So this is just a common format that universities are adopting, be it that it is at the master's or the PhD level. So it is a common approach that universities are taking. You may find that your university also has a different approach where they expect you to write your literature review. You are supposed to adapt to what you call your university format. But you will find that the approach of how it is supposed to be written, how the sources are supposed to be collected are the same regardless of the kind of format that you have. Because when we talk about the final approach, it is a standard approach by how we do it. When we write how we can write it to avoid plagiarism, every university have set what you call standard of plagiarism. And in order for you to avoid it, the 3 rule applies all across the continent on how you can avoid plagiarism by paraphrasing your sentences very well and putting your own ideas in developing what you call, and then after that you give credit to the author who came up with that given point. So you do write citation according to APA, according to MLA, according to Harvard, according to Oxford, based on the standard upon which your university has adopted. Because the other universities will be adopting Harvard style, other universities will be adopting Oxford, others will be adopting what you call the APA, others will be adopting MLA. So based on that guideline that they have provided, other things remain the same on how literature review is supposed to be conducted. And otherwise, up to that point, I say thank you so much for listening into the class.